So good afternoon. Hi, Shamus, and thank you so much for having us.
Hello to you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Shamus is Defected's A&R, and today we'll be uncovering more about the work of an A&R and also what a label so paramount as Defected is looking for music-wise and much more. So A&R quite literally means artists and repertoire, which are arguably the most important assets within a label. What's your background? I know you're an artist too and a DJ. And how do you think that has provided you with the tools to be an A&R for such an important label as Defected?
Yeah, so I do DJ and produce, and I mean, my background... So I was distracted and I got to work. Someone was outside my window trying to get my attention. Yeah, DJ and producing. So I when I was DJing, I was always mixing and scratching my bedroom, and I was also creating my own kind of mashups. And, you know, I guess it helped me when it came to A&R because A&R is obviously artist and repertoire. So you're dealing with the artist and the repertoire. So a lot of the time, if you're really getting into it, you're actually putting producers together with singer-songwriters and making that collaboration happen. So I guess, you know, in a rudimentary way, when I was just mixing records in my bedroom, a lot of the time I was taking acapellas from old records from the 80s or 70s and putting it over records that were from the 80s or the sort of late 80s or early 90s and sort of modernizing records myself. So I was sort of like doing live remixes, I guess. And then when I got into producing, I got into doing a lot of the same thing. You know, when I did Last Night at DJ Save My Life, it was taking an old 80s acapella but putting over a much more modern record and remixing it. So I got into the producing side quite naturally. And then when it comes to A&R, you've obviously got that skill set where you're used to being a DJ, you know what works on the dance floor, so you kind of know how the records should be arranged, and what you want to hear as a DJ as well when it comes to production. And then the idea of producing records as well, and trying to be creative and make those things work. So then I ended up writing original music and having original songs written over tracks. So it was a whole progression. So yeah, definitely all of that helps me when it comes to doing A&R. Yeah. Okay,
but I would like you to dig a little deeper, because I think for a younger audience and for students, which will be our audience, I don't think they're really into what an A&R actually does. An A&R chooses the artists and the music that goes into the catalog of a particular label. Yeah. Okay, so how do you manage that and try to stay coherent with an aesthetic view, musically, of course, of a label such as Defected?
I guess, you know, you're in the moment. So whatever's going on at the time, you're sensitive to what's going on in the music scene. So, you know, if you listen to records coming out and Defected now and you compare it to maybe 10 years ago, or if you compare it to 20 years ago when I first started at the label, obviously the sound has changed and evolved, you know, and we were putting out records 20 years ago, which were, a lot of records were coming from America, a lot of sort of disco house records. So records like Soul Searcher, Can't Get Enough, or Powerhouse, What You Need. And these records were as they were. We didn't really need to do much to these records. We could release them and they were going into the pop charts in the UK, you know, because that was what was going on. 10 years later, we had a whole shift, and obviously the whole EDM thing was going on as well, and that kind of changed the market. And now we've had a bit of a backlash to that, where people want house music again and disco house, and it's come good. So we can go back to doing what we were doing many years ago, but at the same time, it's still got to be forward thinking, you know. But a real A&R person, you know, can either just pick up records which are hot at the moment, or what we tend to do a lot of the time is actually make records. So you're talking to a producer, okay, make a piece of music. Once they make a piece of music that we're happy with, then we can get involved and say, okay, do you know what? There could be a songwriter that I could get involved. there could be, it might be that the songwriter sings on the record, or it could be they sing the record, put down a guide vocal, then we actually get a singer, an artist to feature on the record. So there's lots of ways to approach it.
Okay, that's the creative part of an A&R, because it's not just picking music out of the demos you get, it's also creating the catalog for the label, and that's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so but what I find very interesting about Defected is that you have to balance history and of course the amazing catalog that you already have with what's happening now. And you've just secured one of the hits of the early 2000s, which is Spilla's Groove Jet, which I remember coming out. It was a huge hit worldwide. So it's coming out this summer, and it's going to be accompanied by remixes for what I read. Do you have other songs, like classic songs, that you would like to add to Defected's catalog?
Well, there's some records that we have, and then the terms expire sometimes, for example. So we might license a record and it could be for 10 years. We've just done that actually with a record called It's Yours by John Cutler, which, we're going back 20 years now. So we just renewed the rights to that. And it's a record that's an underground record, but, for example, if you were to look on Spotify, you can see that it's had like 5 million streams. So straight away we can see the money that it's turning over, and that's obviously not taking into account what it's going to do on Apple Music and Deezer and the other sites. So records that, and I don't mind saying this because sometimes there are records that we would love to pick up, but it doesn't quite happen because whoever owns the record, they might have had a hit record. I wrote down a few examples. So South Soul Nugget by M&S. A really good friend of mine, Ricky Morrison, was one of the producers of that record. Again, it's going back 20 years ago. He got the rights back to that record. It's doing good numbers. Again, about 5 million Spotify streams at the moment. And, for us to do the deal, we'd have to put up a lot of money for that record. And if he's already got it and it's ticking over, he's doing good business, Two other records that I wrote down. One is Just Won't Do by Tim Deluxe, who's another friend of mine. And, we used to work in record shops together before he made that record. The rights obviously reverted back to him from the major label many years ago. If you look on Spotify, it's got about 15 million streams and he's got the rights to it. And again, he just doesn't need to do the deal with us because as well as getting streams, there will be other opportunities like syncs, which you'll probably speak to your students about, which means it could get used on TV or radio or film. It's just one of those records, and he makes good money from his catalogue, So we've had a discussion with him, and it was just a lot of money. And then one that I don't mind telling you about because they're doing really well is Black Box. And, there's Ride on Time. There's some other tracks like Everybody. And we did have a really good chat with Daniel Davoli, one of the main guys. For example, Ride on Time, it's got about 35 million streams on Spotify at the moment. And we did talk to him. And once we dug into it with him, we found that the money he's making each year from the streams and from sync and licensing opportunities, it was like, well, you're doing really well, so we can't really pick it up. We'd have to put a lot of money on the table, and we're just an independent label, so it didn't make sense. And there's some other records that we're always keeping an eye on records. So there's some others that I'm not going to tell you about, but we'll see. We're always trying. Yeah.
It's already very generous of you to tell us 3.
Well, if somebody wants to pick those records up, good luck to them because they have to put a lot of money on the table.
Yeah, of course. But it's funny. I remember all of them and they're amazing tracks. So
yeah.
At the same time, when you release a record that has been a hit or is still a hit because it's accumulating streams on streaming platforms.
Yeah.
You also try to bring it to today's sounds by adding remixes to it. So it's always good to revive a track through remixes, and I think that's what your intention towards Spiller's Groove Jet, right?
Yeah, they need to be. And I'm not going to tell you who's remixing that yet. It's a bit top secret. But we put out a tweet just saying we got the rights to it, and then we were inundated with people messaging to say they'd love to remix it, etc., and some really big names as well. We were quite surprised. So I'm currently working on that at the moment, and there'll probably be two parts to it. I think we're going to do we're going to do mixes on Defected, and we're going to do mixes on Glitterbox. But yeah, I think if you're doing remixes, you have to be sensitive to the project. So we did recently pick up a record for Life of Copyright, a disco classic called Cathedrals by DC LaRue, which, you know, is a monumental disco classic record. And we made a good offer on the record. And where we've done remixes, we've just done vinyl. The digital will go up soon. It's on a new label we've got called Faith. Again, and we were completely faithful to the original record. It's also it's such a classic old disco record as well. It's not a case of taking it and quantizing it so that it fits. People did a remix where they've got the stems, but they've stayed sensitive to the original. So they've not tried to quantize it or warp the beats. It's the original time that would fluctuate like a disco record would. So, you know, Jamie 326 did a remix, Maurice Fulton, Dave Jarvis and Terry Farley from Faith did a mix as well, and there was a Greg Wilson edit. So we've stayed very sensitive to what that record was about. And then there's other records that we did, you know, we picked up Glory, Junior Jack Presents Glory, Hold Me Up featuring Jocelyn Brown. And on that, we could take it, you know, a lot clubbier, with the likes of Reva Starr and Ferric Dawn on the mix, and also Michael Gray. So we kind of covered a very sort of pumping disco record from Reva, Michael Gray, a bit more new disco, and then Ferric Dawn, you know, more for the house heads. So certain records, you can take it down different avenues. A record like DC LaRue Cathedrals, you're not going to get a Ferric Dawn mix on that. You keep it in the disco aficionado area. And then with Spiller, there's lots of ways we can go with that, you know. So, you know, you'll see we've got some exciting mixes coming up. Okay.
I'm not going to ask you who they are. Don't worry. Okay. So I was finding it interesting that you said as soon as you tweeted about Spiller's Groove Jet that you got inundated by requests to remix it, which makes perfect sense. Any big name working from 20 years ago to now will remember how big that record was. So that brings me to my next question, which is something that most people have no idea of, is how many demos do you receive a month? And this is, I'll just ask you for a ballpark, of course.
I did try to work this out. It's difficult. I think over the course of the month, I think it's anywhere from 500 to 1,000.
Okay, yeah. That's a lot. Because sometimes people don't understand why they send demos to labels and labels do not reply. And I think it has to do with volume, and on one side, and on another side with, of course, people maybe sending demos that make no sense in that label. And I would like to hear from you about this. Like, how many demos do you receive? Oh, how many? It's a ballpark always. Do you receive that don't really match the label's aesthetic? And what type of advice would you give to music producers and artists in general before sending to a label? Would you advise them to do their homework and go listen to what the label actually releases so that they can make sure that what they are sending is, a Cinderella's fit for that label? Or do you like to be surprised?
Well, you have just answered the question. And I think also further to that, you know, so for example, if I get an email that isn't addressed to me, I just delete it. So, you know, if it's just, because a lot of the time it just looks like it's to undisclosed recipients. It's just a blanket email. And it's like, well, and even sometimes, you know, I got one last week where it was sent to me and maybe 5 labels. Actually, on the top of the email, it said to me and then to, and I just deleted it. Yeah, because it doesn't show, you've got to show the label you're sending it to that you really want to sign to that label, and you're specifically sending music to not only that label, to the person that you should be speaking to. So I think that, yeah, you've got to find out who, and there's no excuse for not finding out who the A&R is. It's very easy. Whether you email or you call, you just say, who is the A&R? You find out their email address, and whoever's on reception, they'll be more than glad to give you that person's email address, because they don't want to get the demos, right? Whoever's on reception or front desk, they're not interested. So they'll be like, right, send it to whoever it is. Exactly. They can do their job. And then obviously, you know, don't be disheartened if you don't hear back from the person, but you've got to chase up and, you know, but going back to what you said about what you should do before you send the music and researching that it's going to the right label. I think that the first thing you should do is just make sure it's good enough. You know, like play it to your, not just playing it to your friends and family and people that like you and love you and they're going to tell you it's great. You want to be playing it to other DJs, or if you're in a music school, that's the perfect opportunity to play it to your peers and people that should give you an honest, honest feedback. Also, your music teachers, like, you know, if you're a music teacher, then obviously you should give honest feedback to the students. Just say, oh, it's great, blah, blah, blah. It's like, so get that feedback from your music. You're in a brilliant position, because also you will, I mean, when things open out, now we're in a pandemic, but you probably get people visiting and doing guest talks. Get this, you know, try and get these people's information, try and get their feedback on your music. And if you put, maybe, I don't know, you might put a demo on SoundCloud or something like that. You can also then get people's feedback. Just make sure that before you do anything with the music, you get the right feedback from people. And this could take you several attempts until you're actually in a position where you can actually send this music to a label.
Okay, I think there's great advice there.
Yeah.
And
Hopefully.
Especially with the email to 5 A&Rs or undisclosed recipients, it's just going to get deleted. So
terrible. Or sending the wrong. The thing is, if you send, you know, the wrong music to the wrong label. So, you know, if I get something and it's got my name, I'll go, all right, let me give it a shot. And you play it, and then it's like completely wrong music. If I ever get an email again from that person, I won't listen to it, because it's like they're just sending the wrong music to the wrong label. Exactly.
And people need to hear that, so that they know they need to be responsible with whatever they send out to A&Rs.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from demos, how would you define Defected's music aesthetic? And this is a bit, difficult, because we're dealing with a catalog that has a lot of classical and precious records, but it's also moving forward in newer directions and newer sounds. So how would you define it?
I think the common thread is that we like vocal records. That's the common thread. So that doesn't go away. So from when I first started working at the label in 1999, it was the same then as it is now. We release vocal records. So there would have been a time that maybe some people thought vocal records weren't in vogue, but you know, when you've got a vocal record, there's so much more you can do with it. It's got so much more longevity. It's not just releasing, you know, what we call weekend tracks. Like when the DJs used to go to the record shop and they buy the latest tracky track, and they'll play it for a couple of weekends, and then it will be just like the next one. So a lot of that was quite disposable, but we try and release music that's got longevity to it. And when you've got a great song, especially when we put records out, when we sign records, we do try and sign records for perpetuity, so for life of copyright, because we put a lot into promotion and marketing of records. There isn't that much money to be made from the sale of records, and the DJ or producer or the artist is going to benefit when it comes to live and we're not getting a share of that. So we do try to sign. Well, we do. That's what we do. We try to sign records for life of copyright, and also it means we can go back and revisit those records in 10, 20 years' time. You know, if it's a great song, we can go back, like, I don't know, Kings of Tomorrow Finally, or something like that. So I think that's what works in our favour, and I think that's the common thread. So the music might change. So let's say we did sign Kings of Tomorrow Finally 20 years ago, and then you flash back to maybe over 5 years ago, a record like Cola by Camel Fat. I mean, musically, they're completely different records, and they're very much of their time, but they're both great vocal records. So they kind of transcend their genre. It ends up it's just a great record. It's just another great dance record that lots of different people will be into because it's just a great record. You know?
Okay, I think you answered my next question.
Okay.
Because no problem whatsoever. I was going to ask you, music-wise, what is Defected looking for? But I was also wondering about what are your wow moments when you listen to a track and you go, wow, this is amazing. Is it just the music, or is it the music plus the artist that has a potential to grow? What goes into the mix of this kind of wow moments, if you like?
I think something like Camel Fat was, you know, that initially that was an instrumental record, and they were put together with different singer-songwriters, and obviously one of them was Elderbrook, and then the magic happened with Cola. But even when that first happened, it was not everybody was completely sure about it because it was so different, you know. But it had something about it. There was some sort of magic there, you know. And then sometimes you might just hear a record like there's a record I picked up called Armageddon by Marco Ferrone and Grieco, which is, you know, by all intents and purposes, is a hip house record. You know, it's a house record, but somebody's rapping over the top of it. But it's a lot more modern than maybe hip house that was coming out, you know, 30 years ago. And that just had something about it. It just sounded really different. It was like a great groove. So the music's great. And then it's got a really unique vocal on top of it. And it just works. So you just get that combination, you know. And sometimes the record, if it's an instrumental record, if it's just a great instrumental record, that's all it needs to be. And it will work as such. But I suppose sometimes with records, to get it to the next stage, when you're talking about radio play and really crossing it over, you need the vocal. It just needs more going on, you know. So sometimes it's just gut instinct, and sometimes you'll just sign a record and it will just have a life of its own. It will just blow up without you actually knowing that was going to happen, and it will just take you by surprise, you know.
And that's one of the things I love the most about the music industry, is that it tends to get you in a humbling place all the time, because sometimes music that you thought you had no expectations towards it, and then it blows up and it's just a huge record. And I think that's a way of letting us know that we can't really anticipate what's going to be a hit.
No. And more often than not, it's the other way around. Like, you sign records thinking, this is going to be great, it's going to be a hit, and then it doesn't really hit. That's what normally happens. Yeah.
I that's something I really love about the music industry, to be honest. So I wanted to ask you about Defected's other sub-labels, if you like, although some of them are amazing, like Fire Combo, Yoruba, they're all sulfuric, your own Big Love. When you receive a demo that you think it's not fit for Defected, do you forward it to anyone else in the team, or you think, do the homework, send it to the proper A&R?
Well, because it's a big team, I mean, look, sometimes people do send stuff to the relevant people. And I think also for me, speaking personally, if I get something sent to me, but it's not quite right for me, then I'd still play it to the team. Like, we'll get together as a team of A&R and play stuff and be like, well, look, this is really good. It's not right for me, but it might be right for your label. So it might be right for classic music or whatever. So So we do try to do that. Sometimes things can fall through the gaps. Maybe somebody doesn't hear something, but if you think outside of yourself and what you're immediately doing, actually it might be good for one of the other labels. So we do try to do that. That's the idea, is that we play stuff as a team, and it'd be like, oh, well, this might not be right for these labels, but it could be good for New Groove. And we did that actually, where we picked up the New Groove label years ago, which is obviously a legendary New York label. It's just a catalogue acquisition. We've got almost all of the catalogue on that label. But then we got a couple of tracks sent in. We got some tracks from Joe Von, who's an underground house hero from New York. We got a couple of tracks from D-Tron, who's obviously a newer guy. But and we really loved the tracks, and we were trying to think where they would fit. And then Simon Dunmore was like, well, actually, these could fit on New Groove. And we're like, oh. So we hadn't really considered signing new records to New Groove, but because we've got New Groove and it's a great label, it's got a great heritage, it's got a great logo, we can do merchandise and push the brand. And since we put out, 2 tracks by Joe Von and D-Tron, now we've got other people coming to us. So Harry Romero has submitted some tracks. Oliver Dollar has done a couple of tracks as well under a different moniker. So people are now hitting us up with new music for that label because they love the label. They remember the label from back in the day. And if it's the right sounds, because it may have been, they might have been thinking about classic music or Defected. It's like, well, it's not quite right for those labels. So now it's just great to have all these different outlets for different sounds,
Yeah, it's amazing. One thing that I'd like to ask is, how much does innovation count towards when you hear new music? Because we're always saying in classes, and I also teach, so that students should be innovative and should try to find their own sound, which we know it's easier said than done. So I was one. Of course, nobody wants to listen the second Groove Jet because that makes no sense. But so, how would you approach the innovation question when it comes to music?
I think it's quite funny actually. Sometimes you do get the second. The second ones are usually they get away with it. It's funny. Like Spiller Groove Jet. And then you got M&S Salsa Nugget. That was the second one, and they did well. And then you had Stardust Music Sounds Better, and then we had Fats and Small Turn Around, so they got in there. So sometimes you can do it with the second record, but once you do that, it's difficult to follow that record up. So if you do a sort of record that's a bit of a copy, not a bit of a copycat record, but inspired by another record, it's difficult. So trying to come up with your own sound, yeah, it's easier said than done. I think, if you're starting out producing music, the most important thing is to choose a lane. Some people are different. You do get some people that can make lots of different sounds and they do it really well and they can DJ and they can make it all work. But there's not a lot of people that can do that. Normally you've got to choose a lane. You say, right, this is the path I'm taking and this is the kind of sound that I want to produce so that you don't confuse people. I mean, especially... I've done a few talks like this before, and you get some students and they're making drum and bass and they're making house and they're making tech house and they're making hip hop. And it's like, right, okay, you're doing too many different things. It's great to do that, to find and choose your path, but going forwards, it's going to be very difficult to do all of that. So at least if you're in one kind of ballpark, whether it's house or techno or drum and bass, that's fine. And just like anything, I did it when I first started out. You do imitate people that you're inspired by. So, you try and make records that sound like other people. But the thing is, if you do that, you will end up coming up with your own sound anyway, because whatever you do, it's not going to sound exactly like that person.
Yeah, musicians also start by playing other people's songs, and then they try to find their path within that. So it's not that copying is as something wrong about it. It's just that you need to move past it. in that sense.
Yeah, take some inspiration, maybe take an arrangement from here, listen to how people arrange music, maybe take some sounds from here. Not just try and out copy one person's production sound, do you know what I mean? But you can take inspiration, and once you start doing that, then you've got a palette to work from, and then you can kind of create what's your sound.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on something you just said about in the beginning, producers trying to, just move around the spectrum of genres and just doing a bit of everything and maybe not specializing in one thing. And sometimes it's difficult to argue with them and explain to them why you should focus on something. So can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, because, ultimately, if you want to release your music yourself or on a label, it has to be marketed, and it's going to have to go somewhere. It's going to have to fit into a box, whether you like it or not. It's going to have to go somewhere. It's going to have to get championed by somebody or people that like what you do. It has to go somewhere, Otherwise, if you want, there are some people like someone like Red Light who does make house, but he also does the bass thing where he makes drum and bass, but he does the drum and bass stuff on a completely different moniker, So you can do that, making, let's say, a couple of sounds under different monikers. But ultimately, when you think about making music these days, it does feed into live, because you can, depending on what sort of music you make, unless it's really commercial, really crossover stuff, your career and your income is going to be based on going out and performing. And so you have to be promoted and marketed in that sphere. And, if you've got 5 monikers, it's going to be difficult to have a schedule where you can go out and perform live as 5 different people, Maybe if you've got 2 monikers, you can get away with it. Ultimately, 1. And you just got 1 strong brand, and that's what you're about. And you're going to have someone managing you and someone doing your bookings. But that's the thing. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. It's only if you're doing something like a band scenario, like, I don't know, Rudimental, who can do stuff that's house, that's maybe dubstep, that's drum and bass. That's a different thing. That's a whole nother ballpark. But there's not many acts like that.
There's not many acts like that.
No.
Okay. So moving forward, so Defected has been very active working the future. And when I mean working the future is the Twitch partnership that you did recently, and also the SiriusXM radio show. How do you balance being both an historic label with an amazing catalog and also a present day label with eyes on the future? How do you balance those two?
I made some notes because your questions are very detailed. So let me see what I wrote down.
I studied.
Yeah. I have made some notes saying basically we have to keep an eye on modern technology. So that's really important. So I think, at Defected, we've got a big team of people. We've got like between 40 to 50 people, depending on what time of year it is and events that are going on. And, there are people in all those different departments that specialize in their field. So we've got people that specialize in social media and forward-thinking business ideas and business strategies and all that stuff. And thankfully, I don't have to worry about that stuff. And it's I just worry about signing records, and that's what I love doing. So, as soon as the pandemic kicked in and we were quick, we were like, okay, so, sort of this time last year, we all left the office. And within 1 week, it was announced that we were going to be doing a live stream festival, which we did from Ministry of Sound, and it was a Glitterbox one straight away. So it was organised. We got the DJs in, and we tried to take precautions in the way that we were doing it. And at that time, we didn't quite know. Nobody knew the real restrictions that would kick in when it came to social distancing. But but we jumped on it straight away, and we raised money. So it wasn't, you know, we weren't doing it to raise money for us. It was completely right. Let's raise money for the National Health Service. And overall, I believe that all the live streams that we did, we raised £500,000, and we did it in conjunction with Google, who said they'd match it, but they matched it twice over. So I believe there was like 1.5 million raised, which was amazing. So, you know, we were just trying to be proactive, keeping our audience engaged, trying to keep people's spirits lifted, and trying to keep some positivity, and at the same time raising money for a good cause. And so the upshot for us was just keeping that engagement with people. It did also, we didn't really realize this, but it was reflected in our online followers, you know, so that's really increased in the last year. So a bit of a bonus for us. And now we're at sort of 7 million across all our platforms, basically. So that's one thing I wrote down, keeping up with modern technology. The audience is always changing, so you've got to find new ways to engage with them. You know, I mean, I don't use Twitch and I don't use Snapchat, but no, I use all the others. But, you know, my kids, well, one of my kids, he's not on any social media, believe it or not. The other one, he's on all of it, and he's on Snapchat. So you've got to find these new ways. And obviously Twitch being used by gamers, and it seemed like it was there was a good opportunity to use it for music. And that's down to, as I said, it's down to our team and our sort of chief business manager and these guys finding new ways to engage with our people and to market what we do, and coming up with the right partnerships.
I think that's amazing, and I was really surprised when I read the news that you were doing the Twitch partnership, because you always have this idea of a classical label, in this case Defected, being, you know, like something that you don't move. But then Twitch is, of course, its audience matches dance music's audience, because it's mostly men or male, and it's the gaming audience is very lookalike to what dance music fans are. So I thought it was such a great fit, and I'm really happy to know that there's someone in the team thinking about this because we need to change. Audiences do change, because the people that are going out, well, I'm not going out, and I used to go out all the time.
Yeah.
You see, so it's not for me anymore. It's for the kids who are, I don't know, 17 to 25 or 26 or 30, maybe, you know. So we need to think about this change permanently, even if we're not on the target anymore.
Yeah.
So we asked our student community for some questions, and this one actually I planned on doing, but André Garcia, one of the school students, did it for me, and he wants to know about the documentary. Everyone is pretty excited about the documentary Where Love Lives. Who do you wish it to reach, and are there any plans to do something global, because the message is so important, I think. And what he wants to know is if there's going to be a festival inspired on Glitterbox Night.
Oh, right. Okay. Who would I like it to, I think, look, we would like it to reach, you know, everybody. It's you know, it's quite an amazing documentary, and it's quite amazing to think about where we are now compared to, you know, when I was growing up. So we're going back a long way, and people are a lot more open-minded. You know, my children will be more open-minded than me, and I would like to think I'm more open-minded than my parents and the parents before them. And so on a universal level, yeah, we'd like as many people to engage with it. I think it could be very educational for people, a real eye-opener. And, you know, it's forcing you to see something from somebody else's perspective, because if you're not in their shoes, if you've not walked in their footsteps, you've got no idea what it's like. It's very easy to make assumptions about people, but at the end of the day, you don't know what it's like to be in their position. So we obviously addresses a lot of the LGBTQ plus situations and experiences, and it's not done in a cynical way. I think what we've done with the documentary is, instead of just focusing on the DJs, it was focusing on the people that make it happen, the dancers and the people on the dance floor.
Yeah, but also to do with the message of that has always been in electronic music since its early beginnings, of inclusivity, of the dance floor being a space open to everyone, and that we are all alike on the dance floor. So I think it's not only it's for everyone. It's a message of diversity and inclusivity that doesn't. Although I do think that generations tend to be more open-minded, as you said, I also think there are some comebacks of things that we did wish not to come back, and we have that with all the right movements and populism movements, and so I think it's very appropriate that we remember everyone that loves electronic music of what are the values of this culture.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, look, if I go back to when I was first going out clubbing, and I was DJing, but I was also clubbing in the sort of mid-'80s. And if you think about it, well, for me, it was the only place where you would get this mixture of people, whether it's rich kids, working class kids, students, gay people, mixed, whatever. It was, and all different races and creeds and beliefs. It was just like, because you're there for one reason. You're just there for the music. Yeah. You're
and
there for the love of the music. That's what you're there for. So it brings you together. And then you start getting to know people that you probably wouldn't normally get to meet in everyday life, and talking to them and understanding them. And then it just changes your perspective. It gives you a broader outlook and makes you a bit more understanding and
empathetic.
Yeah, exactly. Of their position on things. And that's what it does. Otherwise, I don't really see where it happens. That's where it takes place.
Yeah. Well, I think this is an amazing note to finish our conversation. I really, really want to thank you, because I think this is actually a masterclass.
Okay, good.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Keep doing an amazing job, and we'll keep listening to what Defected releases, both music and documentaries and everything. Thank you so much, Shamus.
Great, thank you.